Hey everyone, I'm going to be trying something a little different here where my dad and I are going to do a rather informal, casual debate on a certain topic. I've talked many times about how through my childhood and throughout my life, my dad has been someone who challenged me repeatedly on my opinions, whether he agrees with them or not, and I thought it might be an interesting, fun thing to do to bring that into the channel so you guys could hear us just have an interesting little debate. And the topic we've chosen here is slightly controversial, but just remember this is just two guys debating anything. We're not trying to offend anybody. And that is whether or not calling yourself an atheist is kind of an inherently arrogant thing to do versus agnosticism and religion, things like that. So, Dad, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mark Green, Daniel's dad, and I'm here with my dog Cash. And a debate, okay, more a discussion, I think, but this should be fun.
All right, so just going to start off with this. Let's just do the most basic blanket question we have here. Why do you think it is arrogant? To establish real quick, he has the opinion that it is arrogant to call yourself an atheist. Neither of us are atheists, but we both are. We're just going to go ahead and discuss this back and forth. I will be taking the other side that I don't think it is an arrogant thing to call yourself. But why do you think it is arrogant to say you are an atheist?
Okay. And that is something I've been saying for a long time, is that to say you're an atheist is to say there is no. And that's proving a negative, which is always very difficult, if not impossible. So I don't believe that my little human brain and everything that it can experience and process is capable of knowing definitively whether there is something greater than me or not. I live in my own little world of perceptions and feeble thinking, and I've never experienced anything that would directly cause me to believe there is a greater being, but that's not to say there isn't. And as I look around at the order of the universe and other things that I can't really understand, like infinity, I have to just try to be humble and say, okay, I know what I know, but I don't know whether or not there is something greater, like a God, a Christian God, some other religion God, or something completely beyond my ken altogether. So that's why I say I'm an agnostic, because I just don't know, and I don't believe I can know. Whereas an atheist, by my definition, says there isn't, and I can't know there isn't.
Okay, so first thing I'll try to point out here is let's go to the other side of that. So do you think it is arrogant to say I am a Christian and I know my God exists?
No. Pardon me, I was having a sip of tea. Let me go back a second to one of my fundamental philosophical tenets, and that is that there's a philosophy or a branch of philosophy called Empiricism, and that branch of philosophy says that there are two kinds of knowledge, the physical and the metaphysical. The physical are those things that we can test, we can feel, we can at least imagine a way to test. The metaphysical are those things that are just totally beyond our ability to set up any kind of even imaginary thought experience about, or experiment about. So to say there isn't, or to say there is a God and I believe in God, that to me is a metaphysical statement. Okay, you believe in God. I can't deny that. You say you know God exists because you have a feeling that God exists, a belief. Okay, that's a metaphysical statement. It's not subject to empirical verification, so I can't say you're wrong. I can't disprove you when you say you believe in God. And I think people that have that kind of belief find great comfort in it, and that's just awesome for them. I can't prove it. I can't disprove it. They believe it. Okay, that's faith.
All right, but can't you turn around and then do the exact same thing for having, let's say, atheist beliefs? Couldn't someone say, look, it's a metaphysical thing. I don't believe it's there. It's not up to me to prove the thing you say exists. It's up for you to prove it exists in some way. Therefore, me as an individual, I don't have to, and I take comfort in that. I take comfort in the fact that I think the world, the universe around me, is a very scientific-based, predictable in a way, experience, existence. Isn't it kind of just two sides of the same coin there?
Well, there are people like Einstein who said that the fact that the universe is such an elegant, perfect clockwork is indirect proof of the existence of a greater being, and that this elegance is a manifestation of the order that was imposed on the universe by a god at some point. But for you as an atheist to say, it's just my belief, okay, if you have a metaphysical belief that there is no God, I find that curious, but I certainly can't deny it. But you can't in any way prove to me any belief, any purely metaphysical belief. So I think it's interesting to have discussions about metaphysical concepts like there is no God. But when people go around saying, you're right, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm wrong about metaphysical constructs, that's just a waste of time.
I'm having a hard time not seeing a disconnect here where the people who are or more extreme sides of religion do the same thing. It's I'm right, you're wrong. It's my God, not yours. That's why, there's holy wars.
Right.
There's that absolute side of it. So would you say that extreme side of religion is arrogant as well?
Arrogant. I suppose you could characterize it that way. Those people certainly don't subscribe to my empirical or philosophy of empiricism, dividing the physical and the metaphysical. They think that it's all one, and that they see manifestations of God's handiwork every day, and that's part of how they know there is a God. And maybe they've been touched by a miracle or whatever in their perception. And that part of their reality is something that they know and therefore believe it is a truth that can be imposed on other people. I disagree with that. I can't. There has never been an instance of a intervention by a supreme being that I can't at least somehow imagine explaining by some form of science. Therefore, I think that their statements that a supreme being has physically manifested itself in our world in a meaningful way are untestable, and therefore not something that we can argue about. We can discuss any metaphysical concept, but we can't try to impose those kind of beliefs on each other. We shouldn't, in my opinion.
Okay, so here's going to be my first real...
This is so rambling. I'm very uncomfortable with the degree that I'm talking and talking and talking, but it's not structured. I hope this is useful.
Well, I think I'm going to talk back a little bit here now, because I asked a couple questions here fairly deliberately. So we've established that, okay, there's arrogance on both sides in the extreme here. There's people who have this absolute beliefs. That's the arrogance. That's where the arrogance comes in. This, I'm right, you're wrong, don't even try to question me. I get that. I agree with that to an extent. But I won't assign the label arrogance to it. Because in my opinion, with religion and atheism in these extremes, there's a level of your upbringing. There's certain things that influence your belief that usually push people to these extremes. People don't just wake up in a normally healthy day and go and do religious horrible things and do bad things to people like that. And I think the other side of it is true. The extreme atheists, the people who seem to hate religion, the people who label themselves as anti-religion, I think there's usually a matter of circumstance there. And I think assigning a label of arrogance is not going to bring people together. It's not going to start a discussion. What you're going to end up doing is alienating more, and having that view of them is very unhealthy. And I wouldn't ever call someone that, because to me it's not an arrogant thing they're doing. It's a matter of not understanding, of not being open or willing to hear out and listen to other people. And it's driving apart rhetoric to call them arrogant and to view them that way. I would say the correct way to approach people on both sides of this kind of more extreme standpoint is with a more accepting mentality of, okay, here's what you believe, and here's what I disagree. Because I think even what you said at the beginning here, of just your base philosophy not allowing you to have these extremes, anyone who has a rational mind could understand that, and I'd say be persuaded a little bit. I mean, I used to be much more sympathetic to atheists and align myself closer to them, but it was having those talks with you that kind of brought me more to the middle of just accepting and openness. And if you had just bulked at me, called me arrogant, I think I would have pushed further away. So I just disagree with the label, the focus, the real thing we're debating here, whether or not there's arrogance in it. I don't think so. I think it's more of you're not arrogant, you're misinformed, or you're extreme, or you're angry in some way, where it becomes it's not that you are this, it's you're anti that. And I think that's where the extreme religions and the extreme atheism kind of come and can meet there. There's actually a weird similarity in their extreme pull away from each other, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And on an abstract basis, I think I would agree with that. But when I think of the real life examples I've encountered, my grandfather was a Methodist preacher, and he had an absolute faith in a Christian God, and that it was the duty of Christians to go on missionary trips to inform the rest of the world and bring them around to believing in his Christian God. And I never thought of him as at all arrogant. I thought that his belief wasn't a belief that I shared, but I loved the fact that it brought him so much comfort and it helped establish the moral and ethical framework he lived in. But I would have never thought of him as being arrogant. But when I think of the atheists that I've encountered, one in your family in particular comes to mind, they tend to be more people who have thought about this stuff in a more distant, I don't want to say, as more abstract concepts. And once you've gotten to the point that you're thinking about religion, non-religion, that sort of thing, as an abstraction, and you've decided, no, I know there is no God, I can't help but, the best word I can come up with is arrogant. Maybe there are better words for that kind of certainty where I think you can't be certain about that. And I call it arrogance. Maybe there's a better word for it, but I hear where you're coming from. Most of the atheists I know are more likely to be arrogant than many of the wonderful, really brilliant religious people that I know.
I agree with that.
That just are faith-based.
So, changing up a little bit, because I don't think we disagreed there much, but there's some misunderstanding and some real difference to what some people understand as atheism. I think recently there was a great example. Colbert had Ricky Gervais on, a very public atheist, someone who probably fits into that more arrogant feeling you talk about. And what he said was, okay, well, it's a matter of basically semantics for me to call myself an atheist instead of an agnostic. And it's the same way he basically said, well, Colbert, you're an atheist for thousands of gods that existed. You don't believe in all the Greek gods, you don't believe in all the Egyptian gods, but you're not atheist for this one God. The only difference in his mind is that he just says no to this last one God as well. And I think you can extrapolate from that if you are a Christian, or if you abide by any religion, you're saying these other gods don't exist. Mine does. And I think that's basically the same kind of rejection.
That's just an unuseful definition of atheist. I've never heard anyone before say that you're an atheist if you only believe in this God. If you believe in any God, any sort of metaphysical being, you are not an atheist. You can be a religious person who believes in Thor, but denies Christ as a God figure. That doesn't make you an atheist. If you believe in any metaphysical supreme being, you are not an atheist. Now that we've established you aren't an atheist, we can talk about which religion or religions you believe in, if any.
So you think there's no use in saying, well, you reject all these gods. You are, if you were in a society that your religion did not exist, and you were with this one, you've already said, I would not believe in it. It does not exist. Zeus does not throw lightning bolts.
If you believe in any supreme being, you're not an atheist.
Okay. But you have to agree then that the only difference is one God out of the thousands.
Or the 10 gods you believe in.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's be inclusive.
Yeah.
By the way, we've all seen Thor. We just watched him fight Thanos, so we know he exists.
I'm not sure he's Thor until he gets his hammer back, and we're not that far in the movie yet.
So to continue on, so you reject the idea that the only difference between an atheist and a religious person is one God.
If you believe in any supreme being or beings, you are not an atheist, in my definition of atheist.
But the point of what he's saying is that people say, because Colbert was saying, isn't it egotistical to say that you know there's not a God? And Ricky Gervais was saying, you're saying you know there's not these thousands of gods. The difference is I'm just not accepting one more. So Colbert was saying, like, yes, you believe in all. I believe in this one God.
Okay, so to me, that's not a question of atheism at all. That's a question of believing in one God and then saying there are not these other gods. Mm-hmm. Is that a level of arrogance or whatever you want to call it? And yeah, okay. I think that if I had a strong belief in Jesus as my personal savior or whatever, that would not necessarily give me the right to say there is no other God. Or for Catholics to say the Mother Mary is a God figure and Protestants to say, no, she isn't. I don't think that has anything to do with atheism. I think that's degrees of religious tolerance.
Okay, but I think that loops into the same conversation here. I think the conclusion we're coming towards is that any kind of certainty in this metaphysical sense comes across, at least in your experience and somewhat of mine as well, as arrogance. Anyone who says, you're right, I'm wrong, in this plane of debate or this field, it's kind of absurd to say you're 100% sure.
No.
Okay.
It goes back to what I first said about proving a negative. I think that anybody that says there is not a God is confident that they know a negative, and I'm saying that we aren't that smart. But for a dear friend of mine from high school, Tom Young, is, I believe, still the head of youth ministries for the Assemblies of God, and he knows there is a God as much as I know anything. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely inculcated in his belief structure. I don't see any arrogance about that at all. That's his belief. Now, he and I were debate partners, and we would certainly debate things. We were successful as debate partners. But I don't think he's arrogant. I don't think he would deny the possibility that other religions have a place as well.
All right. I'm still having a hard time seeing the difference between that kind of certainty and the negative certainty. But this question might clarify it for me. So I'm going to set up a scenario here. I'm going to take what you're saying.
We're thinking about this way deeply than I've pushed this in a long, long time. So don't expect me to be clear or consistent.
Now let me just take it to a logical extreme.
Okay.
To see if I understand.
Reductio ad absurdum.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's say a group of people, or 6 guys, are sitting around a fire. They've never been religion. One of them suddenly says, "There's a God." By your standard, by your logic here, it's now up to the other 5 to prove him wrong. Otherwise, they're arrogant.
No, they can't prove him wrong because he has a metaphysical belief, and you cannot prove or disprove a metaphysical belief. That's beyond empirical verification. And he can probably say, I just heard thunder. And if that's not an example of God, what is? Because all these primitive people sitting around their fire have to explain things like thunder and the sun as some kind of greater power, or they're just going to wander around without any foundation to their beliefs at all.
Okay. Let's modify the scenario a little bit. These guys have access to the internet. And that guy heard thunder. He said there's a God. They then Google it, say, actually, no, this is what thunder is. We know that for sure. Have they successfully proven him and his God wrong?
No, because he then says, okay, so all those laws of physics that you have demonstrated are the reason that we just heard that thunder. That beautifully elegant system of laws must have been put into place by a greater being, because we sure didn't do it. How would it have come to be if there wasn't a greater being somewhere in the universe? They haven't proven him wrong.
Okay.
They've just made him push it back farther.
But you see the issue there. In that case, what you're saying, okay, you can never prove God is wrong. You can never prove God does not exist.
Right. You can't prove a negative. That's why it's arrogant to say you have.
Okay. But let's then take a leap here. And so then the Crusades were justified.
I almost spit out my tea.
No, like, by your logic, the Pope thought he was right. No one could prove him wrong. That's our Holy Land. Therefore, we made the right move to go to the Crusades and do what we needed to do, because you can't prove our God wrong.
Okay, that assumes that the motivation for the Holy Wars were purely based on a belief in a calling. In a belief in a calling to do that by your God. Mm-hmm. And if you have that kind of belief that anyone who kills should be put to death, an eye for an eye or whatever, then by that moral construct, you are doing the right thing. And the Crusades, assuming that there was no financial or political reason for us to go to war in the Crusades, were justified. But that goes back to the fact that we need a system of morals and ethics if we're going to exist as a society. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, those are ascribed to God handing Moses the tablets or whatever. In some cases, people just sit down and say, okay, let's develop a utilitarian system of morals, which will be the best thing for the most people over the greatest time. And that becomes a system of morals. If you have that kind of system of morals and ethics, and that supersedes your belief structure, then you'd never have the Crusades. Mm-hmm. If your belief structure can override a system of morals and beliefs, then you can have Crusades and believe that you're justified.
But God will always override that, because that's inherently what God is. If you believe this is what, or if you believe this is what he or she wants me to do,
right,
it has to override everything else. It's God. So if your belief, you think that it's your opinion, then yeah, okay, the Crusades are right.
Opinion. Let's not opinion. I'm uncomfortable with putting in this. Your belief. Yeah. Yes, but if we do stick with that Christian example for a minute and the Crusades, mm-hmm. you look at even the Old Testament, much less the New Testament. That is the Word of God mm-hmm. that you believe in, and the Crusades were not consistent with Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, for instance. So you'd have to decide, gee, maybe I'm mistaken in my urge to go conquer the Middle East. Maybe I should pay more attention to what Jesus said about love and all that.
Okay. But the human element will always influence religions. People throughout history use religion to do things. It's a tool. It can be a tool used for great good or evil. And I don't see...
People use it to justify things. Absolutely. They twist. You can find justification for just about anything in the Bible.
Oh, yeah. There's rappers nowadays who say God wanted me to succeed, God wanted me to be rich. I find it a little strange to think God cares about your rap career, but there's people who do it to say, this is why I'm successful, this is why I do this is why I don't, it's used for whatever. But to bring all of this back, if we're going to be in a society where we treat each other well and behave as individuals, the mentality that, okay, someone proposes this God, we can't prove them wrong, therefore they have every right to believe that, it can be dangerous because it leads to things like Jonestown, Crusades, because, okay, we can't shut them down, we can't say you're wrong. I don't see that as a healthy thing. And here's the thing, I don't necessarily believe they're wrong. I'm not an atheist, I'm agnostic. But I just think you're applying two different principles here. I can't say an atheist is wrong just as much as I can't say these religious people are wrong.
I'm not saying an atheist is wrong when they say there is no God. I'm saying I can't know that, and I think that atheist is being somewhat arrogant by saying that they know, with a capital K, there is no God. But the Jonestown things of the world, mm-hmm. I'm saying, again, there has to be a system of morals and ethics in a well-structured, well-running society. Those are often structured out of some kind of religious belief, such as we have codified in the Judeo-Christian ethic, and that we have to agree as a society that you can think and believe whatever you want to. You're allowed. That's an empirical thing that you have going on. God love you. I hope it brings you peace. But you can't go out and start killing people or doing other things that are against the rules of our society, because we have to have those to have a society in which people live comfortably and respect each other's opinions.
But it seems to be that more and more today especially, we're seeing people in power and people in everyday life, politicians and your average Joe, saying things like they serve God first in the Constitution. That's becoming... Right. more common,
right?
And that goes against what you're saying. But right. What we're kind of getting off topic here, but I'm very okay with that. What I think though is with religion, that's almost inevitable, because if someone really has that faith, they of course have to go with what they think God would actually want them to do over something like the Constitution. It's inevitable if someone really has that level of religious belief there.
Absolutely.
There's some politicians who do draw a line. Joe Biden's famous for that, where he says he actually would never want his wife or anyone he knows to get an abortion, but he would never make it illegal. because he says, well, it's not my right to oppose that on you. So some politicians are willing to draw that line, but we see others when they're trying to attack gay marriage, things like this, where they're stepping over it. They're trying to bring religion into their politics.
I am an emphatic supporter of the separation of church and state. Mm-hmm. And there are those current politicians, as there have always been, who say that America was founded to be a Christian nation. No, if you look at the writings of the founding fathers, they're emphatic that we are not based, our government is not based on any religion, and that everybody should have freedom to worship or not worship as they will. And the current, and it has never stopped, urge to inflict, I want to say, but at least inject religion into government is a bad thing for our country. It's always been around. In the 1950s, when everything was so wonderful and we were booming and everything was happy and all that, that's when we introduced "In God We Trust" onto our money and "One Nation Under God" into the Pledge of Allegiance. So this has always been going on, that there have been religious folks who think that the government should be governed by their religion. We have largely been a majority Christian nation, and so it's largely been the Christians who are getting their way with that. But I strongly oppose the contamination of state with church.
So, do you think a politician who, they're pretty much openly saying now, I want to bring God into the government, do you think they should be removed from office? Do you think there should be some law, some system in place where if it's proven you're trying to do that, you should be kicked out?
No, if that's an elected official and they're representing their constituency, then I think they should be allowed to say whatever they want to say. And if the majority of people in the country, enough to create amendments to our Constitution, want us to become a religious state, then if we're going to believe in the way our government was structured, we should allow that to happen. And I'll move to Canada or someplace else. But I think that, we've got the best form of government there is, and I hope that no religion is allowed to take it over. But if you get enough people in enough states that they can start amending the Constitution to make us an Iran, except where Christianity is the ruling religion, then so be it. Dear Lord, I hope that doesn't happen.
See, I'm of the opinion that we found another thing we disagree on here. I think there should be laws in place, things that prevent that, because the majority will often abuse the minority. That's proven throughout history again and again, and I don't think... I think it is actually a real possibility. We're already seeing this kind of religious influence grow stronger and stronger, and I think there should be steps in place to prevent that, because yes, you could get up and move, no problem, but your average person who's poor, living in the streets of some city, they'd have a much harder time. They couldn't escape, so they would just be stuck in a country where they're now the religious minority and a government run by a religion. And I think we need to do everything on a humanitarian level to prevent something like that from happening, because religious minorities that are in a country run by another religion, they almost always get horrendously abused. And I honestly don't think the Founding Fathers would be against something like that. I think it was Thomas Jefferson's letter that the separation of church and state was first brought up, and I think that was written for the reason that they, in hindsight, maybe they really wanted the idea of putting something that would prevent that bleed over from happening, because unfortunately it was only until later on that it became a much more commonly accepted concept, the separation of church and state.
But if you say, I'm going to vote for mandatory availability of birth control, because I think that's the right thing to do, without ever mentioning religion, shouldn't that law be allowed to be passed? Because most people think we shouldn't be killing each other. Most people think we shouldn't be stealing from each other. If it turns out that most people believe that there should be universal availability of birth control, do we allow that to happen, even though really it's a religious thing? It's based on a person's beliefs out of the Bible or whatever, or the flip side of that more often with birth control. I'm not sure where you draw the line.
We covered this a little bit yesterday when we were talking, but I do believe that you need to draw a line. It's very arbitrary. You just need to find a line in the sand that seems reasonable and draw it. Because if we live in a situation where we don't draw those lines, then you run the risk of where that line would have been being left way in the dust. And I think we're legitimately seeing that right now.
There's no perfect form of government.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
There were times in the South when the Ku Klux Klan was formed partly to keep the carpetbaggers from completely trashing the South, and it got out of hand, and oh Lord, and finally was pretty much stifled for a long time. Now it's on the rise again. During the McCarthy era, there was incredibly harmful, wrong prosecution of all kinds of wonderful people that went on for several years.
The Red Scare.
Yeah, and then it got stopped. Mm-hmm. And I think that given our form of government as it is, those sorts of things will always happen. And I think I'm going to say that's okay, even though I hate it. But again, it's an imperfect form of government. But only by allowing things like that to happen and be corrected and happen and be corrected can we have the kind of democracy that we do. And I think that's, I hate to say okay, but it's the best we can do.
See, I reject the idea that we have to somehow experience these horrible things to know they're wrong. We should be able to, one, look at other countries' histories. We don't have to try everything once. There's a quote from Winston Churchill that's like, you can count on America to do the right thing after we've tried everything else.
Right.
I don't like that sentiment. It just seems, especially recently in my lifetime where we seem to be taking so many steps back, I can't agree with that, because honestly it just hurts too much to accept that we're going to have to go through so much more. And there are things in history where, okay, we see they did it, it didn't work out, we're not going to do it. I mean, we watched other countries try communism, it didn't work out, we don't have to try communism. I think that same sentiment can be brought back in. I don't think, I wholeheartedly disagree with the idea that we have to suffer to somehow reach a more enlightened state. There's a philosophy about that, or some kind of belief system about that, but I don't think that applies to governments. I think history is there for a reason.
Well, I think we can certainly learn from history, no question about that. But I think that the best form of government that we've tried allows people to have beliefs, act on those beliefs, and if they're out of line, the majority will eventually say, no, that's wrong, we need to stop that, and then move forward. I look back over my many decades of life, and I look at where we started in terms of race relations, in terms of several other things about the society that just weren't very good back then, and how far we've come. It has certainly not been a straight line. There have been ups and downs all along the way with repression and criminal stuff and horrible things, but in general things have gotten better. And right now, yes, we're absolutely in a downswing, with environmental regulations being turned over like crazy and racism being tolerated like it hasn't been for a while. And I think that this dip is horrible. Mm-hmm. But based on my experience with our history, this is a dip, and the overall regression line will continue to be positive, and we will have learned from this and do better 10 years from now than we're doing now.
Okay. There's that quote from Martin Luther King you've told me a few times, where it's like the arc of justice is long but leans towards the right. I understand what you're saying. You're absolutely right. There's a cycle of ups and downs. I just don't think the downs are necessary, especially when they're so scary. Who knows how much further we'll go down before we start going up. That's always a question. Scary
for sure. Aristotle said that you give both sides of an argument equal forum to present their argument, and the right will win. And I pretty much believe that, and that's one of the things that was cool about being on a debate team and all that sort of stuff, is give everybody the equal chance to get their arguments out there, and the right will out. Well, nowadays, with what's going on with the tampering of our social media and that sort of thing, we're not getting that equal platform for both sides to express their opinions. Our discourse is being poisoned by external manipulation of very powerful electronic forums, and it's going to be very interesting to see how we get through that. I think we will. I think it'll take a while, and we'll be back to a point where democratic values and the right will out. But for now, we're in a really tough spot in that regard.
I'm gonna take a bold step here. I'm gonna say something that many fools have said before. I disagree with Aristotle. I don't think if you give two opposing opinions equal chance, the correct opinion will be accepted or be viewed as the right one by the majority. I think humans fundamentally tend to ignore things they disagree with. And I've seen in my lifetime especially, it's not about facts. You know, it's about, no, this guy's reaffirming what my guy says, I'm going to back what he says. It's, people will reject fundamental realities of the world around them just to say, oh, look, I'm still right. I totally believe that now after seeing the recent developments and, you know, how news is presented, how people will just deny things they can physically hear and see. So I don't think Aristotle understood. Maybe the human condition has somehow changed. I'm sure it has in a lot of ways since Aristotle's time. But we live in a, I'm not going to say post-fact, that's too dramatic, but in a opinion over fact political climate.
Well, Jane, you ridiculous slut, you're wrong as usual. And you're arrogant in saying such a thing. Remember, it was Aristotle who said that there are three ways to persuade people: ethos, logos, and pathos. And logos, the logic, the argument, is only one. Then there is also the credibility of the speaker, the ethos, logos, pathos. Ethos is the credibility of the speaker, and then pathos, the emotional appeal. And all are equally powerful, and all should be brought to bear. And you're just focusing too much on the fact that people aren't necessarily persuaded by logos. Agreed. Aristotle would say, right, you need to bring the pathos and ethos to bear as well if you're going to persuade people.
I agree. Pathos, ethos, and logos are incredibly important. But
Aristotle was right. That's what you just said.
But I don't think he incorporated the fourth factor, which is just blind allegiance. I mean, there's a famous quote from the 2016 election where Trump said he could go out in the street and shoot someone in the chest and he'd still keep his core base.
His ethos is incredible with his core base.
Yeah.
And Aristotle wasn't aware, I don't believe, of cognitive dissonance, which is an incredibly powerful force in trying to persuade people.
That's the smart way to put what I was trying to say. There's a cognitive dissonance, and I don't mean to just bash conservatives or say it's all Trump supporters. There's people across the spectrum who have cognitive dissonance with a lot of their beliefs. And
I know I do.
Yeah, I'm sure I do too with a lot of things. But you're never going to be able, no one will ever believe 100% factual things because everyone has their own biases and their unwillingness to accept certain things. And that will prevent the truth from winning out 100% of the time.
Okay, I disagree.
All right, fair. No strong counterpoint to bring in?
I think that ethos, logos, and pathos, you're just saying ethos is incredibly powerful, that they're going to believe Trump no matter what, and I completely agree with that.
Right. But doesn't that prevent the truth from winning?
Aristotle didn't say it will happen right now after the first argument, and I think that if you put a representative of Trump's viewpoint and a representative on counter viewpoints and gave them each the opportunity to speak equally and talk people through their cognitive dissonance, that at the end of that very long, protracted process, the right would out. And that in society, that might take years or decades in some situations for people to see all the evidence that's going on. There are still people that deny that climate change is even happening, much less that it's being human-caused. And the amount of evidence is becoming so freaking overwhelming that eventually I don't see how the right won't out. But there are still people who deny that climate change is even happening. There are flat earthers out there. Yeah. Oh my God.
Seeing that senator throw a snowball was one of the low points of politics in a long time.
People aren't elected to high office on the basis of their intelligence.
Unfortunately. There's the whole philosopher king idea, which would not work out.
Would if you had the right philosopher king.
True. But I don't think that man has ever existed.
Or woman.
Okay. Damn, darn it. I'm not being inclusive. All right. That's pretty much all I had to say on this. Anything else? Any tail ends you want to wrap up?
No, this was fun.
It was a lot of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this little back and forth. If it's popular and my dad's willing to, we might do it again someday. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support the channel. And what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.